Hello and welcome to the Sustainability Expert Series. I'm Janet Greco from Broadcast Projects and the executive producer of all the events that take place here on this platform. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to be here. Today, we are launching a new strand in the series, which we have nicknamed the Media Policy Meet and Greet, an idea inspired by our new sponsor, Greening of Streaming. Today's theme is the circular economy, carbon calculators, and media policy. And we've curated a program that brings together some of the brightest minds in the field. We're going to kick off today with a new regular feature, the Media Policy Weather Report, featuring Dom Robinson, in conversation with eminent media lawyer John Enser, who is a partner at CMS UK. And we are all looking forward to our spotlight speaker, Walter Stahel, a giant of the circular economy, who since the mid-1970s has been an active proponent of circular thinking. Today, he runs the Product Life Institute in Geneva. Walter will be in conversation with sustainability experts Eileen, Duggan, and Nicki Rocca from the Irish public broadcaster RTE. They will then be joined by key players from the Flemish media policy landscape, including Tim Wagendorp, Sustainability Coordinator at the Flemish Audiovisueel Fund, and Jonathan van de Velde, who's the Program and Communications Director at MediaNet Vlaanderen. In the second hour, we're going to turn the conversation over to you, the audience. This session will be hosted by our editorial board chair, Benjamin Schwartz, who's the principal at CTOI Consulting, along with our featured guests, Martin Dawson, head of unit at the DG Connect at the European Commission, whose department has been involved in the recent tender for a new audiovisual calculator, and Daniel Sheen, senior lecturer in computer science, University of Bristol, whose work has been instrumental in the creation of the carbon calculator known as DIMPACT. Two gentle reminders before we go on. First, places are going to be limited in the second hour, so if you have trouble to access the room, you may have to try again. And also in the second hour, just be aware for anyone participating in that session that journalists may be present, and we always kindly ask them to secure agreement directly with any participants before if they may plan to quote them. If in doubt, we have some community guidelines which are linked in the description, and I hope you'll review those. Finally, a special thanks to our editorial board who drives our programming, our platform partner, Deal Room Events, and our digital media partners, OTTverse and Fred Dawson from Screenplays. Their support has been so valuable in bringing this event to life, as well as sustaining the dissemination program that we have in the form of event reports, video replays, publicity, and much more. Lastly, a big thank you to Dom Robinson and everyone at Greening of Streaming for the inspired decision to support this new quarterly media policy series, which aims to bring together media businesses, engineers, and policymakers. Our hope is that these conversations, including your views, can empower you to make better decisions and drive sustainable practices in your media business. That's all from me. And now it's time for the weather report.
Cool. I think we should hand straight to John after that fantastic articulate introduction. But I'm just going to steal one brief moment as a word from our sponsors. Thank you for the shout out to all the Greening and Streaming members. So we love the Sustainability Expert Series. We think it's been a real hub for conversations over the last year or so as we've been following it and participating. And we felt it was important to support that, show some sponsorship to help encourage, grow the project. And also we wanted to encourage a broad thinking about media and policy across the industry, not just focused on sustainability. There are many things which will affect the sustainability of our industry and the various projects within that. There is no other person better, I think, qualified to comment on media policy than John Enser. So I'm going to stop talking at this point and ask John to take the microphone, take the stage, and talk to us all about give us the weather report, this new feature, and tell us what's going on in the media policy landscape around the world. John, over to you.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you everyone for giving me this platform. Yeah, I'm really excited to join in these conversations and really to kick them off with what we've called the weather report here, which is our idea about seeing which way the wind is blowing, which way are we moving in media policy terms. And I will try and at the end link it back into the broader topic of conversation today. So I think there are sort of a number of large sort of ongoing projects in the media world in terms of what are we doing. The first is we're clearly moving into a world of greater accountability by platform owners, by intermediaries, all over the world, but particularly in Europe through the Digital Services Act, and in the UK through the Online Harms Act. So we're seeing the increasing regulation and responsibility obligations in relation to platforms. And just to take that to a very obvious example, we've already had the European Commission say they're writing to X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, in relation to their relative lack of speediness in taking down some really quite explicit and unpleasant content in relation to the events in the Middle East recently. So we're seeing regulators very keen to stamp down on that. On the other hand, we've got this new piece of legislation called the European Media Freedoms Act, which is coming through. And in fact, the first sit down is happening tomorrow. So with apologies for those who are not big understanders or followers of European legislative process, the European Media Freedoms Act is just moving into the so-called trilogue process, where the three main European institutions, the Commission, the Council, and the European Parliament, sit down together to try and iron out their differences. That first sit down, in fact, happens tomorrow. What is this European Media Freedoms Act, I hear you all ask? Well, it's really about trying to protect plurality, trying to have greater transparency so people can understand who owns the various different media in various individual member states, and also to try and guarantee media freedom from political interference. Obviously, we've seen some backsliding in a number of territories, particularly, I guess, Hungary and Poland, if we're talking about EU countries, in terms of state control of media, although you would say that the result of the Polish elections this week means that maybe those efforts have not been as successful as some people would have hoped. So we've got greater regulation there, we've got more freedom, hopefully, there. I guess the other thing that is coming along is people are trying to figure out how to regulate some of the new services coming along. And again, I'll pick an example of that something's happened very recently in the last month, which is in the UK. In the UK, the government has decided that instead of just regulating traditional TV platforms and electronic program guides, so traditionally we've regulated like the satellite platform Sky, we've regulated digital terrestrial, and we've regulated cable. Now moving forward, they're looking to regulate a whole range of different EPG solutions. Those will include linear program guides within smart TV interfaces, on devices such as Apple TV, and so on. And what that means is that once they start regulating the EPGs, they're going to also be regulating all of the services available through those EPGs. So if you take a service like, I don't know, Samsung TV Plus, which is available on your Samsung TV set, that has a whole number of fast channels on it that are currently outside the scope of UK regulation. And really through some very strong lobbying from the traditional broadcasters, we've got to a position where the UK government has said, well, there needs to be more of a level playing field. So we're going to regulate these EPGs, and then we're going to take the EPGs, and then we're going to also regulate the actual content that is going through those EPGs. So we're seeing it's gradual regulatory encroachment into the streaming world, which, you know, has frankly been largely regulatory free for a long period of time. But now we're moving into the area where streaming services are going to be much more regulated. I guess the other area where we are seeing much greater and more rapid regulation is in the whole sort of consumer protection world. So we've seen already, once the big streaming services start trying to put their prices up, we've seen interventions from courts, from consumer protection regulators saying you need to give notice. So we've got again, picking the UK as a not entirely random example, because that's where I'm sitting today. In the UK, we're going to have a process where if you've got a streaming subscription, the law is going to set down exactly when you've got to give notice to your consumers. Say your subscription is expiring in 14 days. If you don't cancel, you're going to pay for another year. Your subscription is going to expire in 5 days. If you don't cancel, you've got to pay for another year. So we're moving into this really, I guess, protectionist world where government is being kind of nanny state about regulation. And we're seeing that across territories. We're seeing it across different areas of service. I guess looking on the brighter side, I guess, and to try and move us back into the world of sustainability, we are seeing companies around Europe now being subject to the new rules that are coming into force in terms of environmental disclosures. And so we have new legislation already in the force, but which we will begin to see the results of once people start reporting their financial results for 2023. So from the beginning of 2024, we're going to see companies, large companies, have to provide a relatively detailed set of reporting on their environmental impact. And that is obviously a good thing, because you shine a light on things and bring transparency, then hopefully that influences change of behavior. Although obviously we're going to get into some more detail very shortly about when you introduce carbon calculators, what does that actually do, and does it just influence behavior, or does it just involve box ticking?
It's great to get that sort of a bit of broad context. I'm looking forward to seeing what thoughts this prompts from the audience and discussion points. I think these regulatory frameworks and regulatory changes can catch us by surprise if we don't have some heads up about them. I think sort of as a broad question really to you, John, just from your many years of experience, how do you marry the idea of regulatory frameworks being driven on a technical services industry with the industry's real engineering ability to deliver on those? I think sort of just by as a sort of high level example, I remember we met in the MP3 era.
We did indeed.
We did, and there was a lot of talk about how to put the genie back in the bottle. And it was just fairly evident, I think, to both of us at the time that it was going to be very difficult, if not impossible. And sometimes I think that's why one of the reasons why I think this conversation is so important is to have these conversations early on, because sometimes I think it's just impossible to enforce some of these regulatory frameworks and so on. I just wonder what your thoughts are, because you've had many years looking at this space.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're seeing a point at which regulators and governments are going to have to just kind of get off the fence, because the streaming services have been kind of ignored to the point where they've grown with relatively little government supervision. Obviously, the big services, the Netflixes of the world, the Amazon Primes of the world are regulated, albeit not in the UK at the moment. They're regulated in places like Holland and Germany. Actually, Amazon is regulated in the UK for some of its services, but the sort of the tier below that are kind of not really regulated. And I feel that on the one hand, government wants to regulate it. On the other hand, the regulators are looking at that and going, whoa, yeah, I don't fancy that. So I think you're right in the sense that there's so much content out of there that the idea that you're going to regulate all of it in the way you regulated old-fashioned television is kind of madness, because the government consultation on this new fast channel regulation in the UK is talking about 800 or 900 new fast channels that are going to be subject to regulation. And I think the people who are running those services taking a look at it going, it's just not, you can't run the business like that. It's crazy.
Especially when you start considering almost every YouTube channel is a fast channel.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy.
Rudolph in the chat, just before we finish, Rudolph in the chat has reminded us that the other thing coming down the track is the European Energy Efficiency Directive that's been just been passed in September, or just been published in September, which is going to actually have mean that data centers will have to report energy consumption from this years on, and we're going to be dealing with that. I think Janet has in mind we're going to be dealing with that in January, but there's a huge amount of activity in this whole area, and it's good that the light's being shone on it.
No, it's brilliant, excellent. Well, listen, John, I can't thank you enough for giving us this insight and this time, and look forward to many more weather reports, and particularly seeing you next quarter in January and hearing how things progress.
It's great to be here with everybody, and I'm really looking forward to this session where we meet Walter Stahel, the founder of the Circular Economy, and my colleague Nicki Rocca from RTE, who works with programs with the calculator on sustainability within the organization as well as myself. So firstly, perhaps we'll go to you, Walter. Walter, you're known as the founder of the Circular Economy, and one of the things that really intrigues me is the principles of the circular economy and how we marry those to the behavioural changes which Nicki is in pursuit of in context of use of the calculator and working with programs. So initially, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourselves? Firstly, you, Walter, and then Nicki, and so that then we can have a little fireside chat in context of marrying the two together. Over to you, Walter.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you very much for the introduction. The circular economy is focused on stocks, not flows. That's the first principle. Its scope is to maintain the value of natural, cultural, human and manufactured assets. The circular economy's objectives are twofold: to maintain the value and utility of objects as long as possible, and to maintain the value and purity of atoms and molecules as long as possible. In today's linear industrial economy focused on optimizing flows in production, the circular economy is disruptive. We therefore need a conscious decision to change by individuals, economic and political actors. Business as usual will not bring this change. To measure the magnitude of change happening, we also need measuring tools such as the carbon calculator, to be presented by Nicki. Over to you, Nicki.
Hello, thank you very much, Walter. Nicki?
Thank you for that introduction, Walter, and it's a pleasure to be in the room with such esteemed individual as yourself. My background is working in TV production, and I'm now working with Eileen, who's present here also, with the Environmental and Sustainability team in RTE, which is the national broadcaster of Ireland. What we're trying to do with the calculator is to embed a thinking of being more sustainable. Obviously, we have to make programs. We're making linear programs, but it's the way in which they make them. So incorporating the circular economy, it's looking at ways in which they produce, and that's from cradle to grave, really, from the inception of the idea, how they're actually working, where they're working, what kind of materials they're using in the thinking, and are they working online? Are they working in an office? And then moving on to the filming in the studios, what kind of studios? Preferably LED lighting and as little props as possible, and obviously bearing in mind the circular economy, to reuse props and reusing sets that already exist. And then moving on to travel and accommodations, probably the biggest part of any carbon footprint of a TV production, where they are traveling to, if it's, and how many people are traveling. Can we reduce that? Can we remote film? Can we look at other ways? Can we look at stock footage? Is there other alternatives to what we're doing already? And then into post-production, again, looking at the most economical way. So I suppose all of that encompasses I'm trying to embed the thinking of being more sustainable, and to look how in every aspect of the production, to look at it with a different lens. And I think what's really, really important is to actually, I suppose, coming from the background of TV production, is to speak the same language as these people. Sometimes it's quite hard to translate sustainability to program makers. Their focus is on the content and what they're trying to achieve. But my job is to try and bring in that slant and looking at it with a different lens, and looking at how can you do things differently. There's always an alternative and a different way of producing, whether that be with paper use, whether that be with battery use, whether that be with studio props, all aspects of production. Generally, a producer just wants the end goal and wants to know that the production looks well on TV or whatever platform that is, but it's in how that's produced. So it's really, really critical. I can't emphasize how important it is to kind of get in there at the early stages, to speak to the people who are making the programs and to emphasize the importance of sustainability. On another aspect, apart from the production end of it, content's a really big part of a calculator as well. We're all in a really enviable position and job that we are putting out content to hopefully millions of people. We can get that sustainability language and what we're doing and how we're doing something out to our audiences and make them aware. Education is critical. I suppose it's kind of the thing, if people aren't aware of something, they're not going to act on it. Like think of a couple of basic examples. I don't know if anybody has watched Succession. It was on Sky Atlantic. One of the actors spoke, I thought it was really poignant moment, spoke about Greenpeace. And it was just in some of the dialogue of the program. But the next day, the amount of submissions into people renewing their memberships to Greenpeace went through the roof. So it's amazing how through our content, the subliminal kind of message can get through to our audience. So that's really important, sustainability, how we can work that way. So it's kind of in twofold what I'm trying to say, both on our content and our production.
Thanks very much, Nicki. Walter, can I just ask you, obviously we now have a situation where Nicki has described what she's doing in our team in RTE, and you come with such a vast knowledge of where we're trying to get to in context of the circular economy. And there's a huge amount of noise now about sustainability out there. And is it true that it really is quite simple, Walter, about that message of reduction and elimination of waste? And would you maybe talk to us about where you see the calculator and the tool? It doesn't matter what calculator it is, but the tool of measuring program impact, where that merges with the principles of the circular economy.
Thank you, Eileen. Well, Nicki, I think you should tell us what you have found. What are the biggest carbon producers in your analysis?
Well, again, generally it's in travel. It's in how people travel. Like we've had we're a broadcaster in Ireland, so an island on the west coast of Europe. Generally, if we have to travel to mainland Europe, it has to be by flight or by ferry. So it's it's looking at ways, looking at alternatives. So that's probably our biggest travel. Sometimes accommodation, really it depends on the program, Walter. Sometimes it depends on if it's a sports program, for instance, or it's an entertainment. It's a very different emphasis on what's required and the energy required. But I suppose my job is to build awareness and to make the program makers think differently, to look at alternative ways. We're not going to fix the problem of sustainability in program making. We're not going to be complete, I don't believe, unfortunately, be completely neutral, but it is prompting behavioral change. And that's what a calculator does. It prompts behavioral change and it makes people think, is there a different way? But I suppose to answer your question, it really depends on the type of program it is. We have some programs that are very small, that maybe don't have a lot of cast, don't have a lot of accommodation, don't need to travel very much. It's in a studio that's fully LED. We're in studios in Dublin, so it's easy access to transport. So it's really depending on the program, but really the emphasis is to put on behavioral change, to look for alternative ways of sustainability, whether that be through the circular economy, reusing props, or whatever way possible. What I'd kind of like to ask you, Walter, is do you have any tips putting your thinking circular economy, and just when I mentioned props there, do you have any advice for program makers to incorporate sustainability more in context of the circular economy in their production?
Well, in the production, I think if you can reuse props or share the studio with other people, if you can make better use of the invested capital, that would certainly decrease the material input, but it would actually increase the carbon emissions. So there is not a solution that fits everything. But with regards to travel, I think one way to reduce carbon emissions would be sharing the information gathered by journalists and using crowd scientists on site to reduce traveling. But that would mean that not every TV channel would send its reporter to Gaza Strip, for example. But one reporter team would do this for everybody. Then using drones instead of helicopters. Or if you use, everybody says you have to change from using planes to railways. But then you need to give the journalists or decision takers the information, because railways in continental Europe are very low carbon in Switzerland and France using hydro and nuclear energy, but they are extremely expensive in carbon in Germany because they use brown coal to produce electricity. So I think one of the key things from the monitor, from your tool, is to get more details into sub-chapters. And then, of course, at the moment, everybody's talking about climate change, but tomorrow it may be water and anthropogenic mass. And you can use the same calculator, but then you have to ask people again on these different tools. In my opinion, the anthropogenic mass is, because that means increasing anthropogenic mass means decreasing biomass and biodiversity. And I think in the future that will be the biggest hit, because at the moment we are pushing nature off the cliff, and with that we will die, we will kill ourselves. But politics at the moment is only focused on carbon emissions.
Is it possible, Walter, that when people are managing sustainability within their organizations, that to some extent they're managing within the circle of their control? And I suppose when we're looking at things like the carbon calculator, we're not necessarily looking for the carbon impact and the actual figures. But I suppose one of the ways we've been using the calculator has been to try and change behaviour. Because obviously, if you, whatever measurement you get, however it's calibrated, if you get a lesser one the next time, that's good. And people are learning through using it the behaviours that are negative and the things that are positive. Do you feel that there's an element of illiteracy out there as well, in the context of what, you know, the massive people need to do to change what's going to happen with climate change? And do you feel that policy needs to change at a higher level? And can content influence that?
Yes, well, as I said, there needs to be a conscious decision to change. But of course, this decision must be based on information, on facts. And so if we talk about carbon emissions, the only energy that is zero carbon is green hydrogen. Yet green hydrogen, the production is growing everywhere in the world, but the objects, the cars and aircraft and what else is heating systems is lagging behind. So once, of course, it's a chicken egg situation, but at the moment we have a rapidly growing production of hydrogen for the steel industry, for the glass industry, and in mobility in vehicles. Rolls-Royce has been shown that their big jet engines can be run on hydrogen. But if you look at the car manufacturers or politicians, they say carbon reduction is batteries, and they completely neglect the mass, anthropogenic mass impact in producing batteries, and of course in the waste problem. So we need a holistic information, because most people think in a very linear way, caught in their silo. It's very difficult to give them the tools and convince them that they have to break out of their silos and take many other information into account. But then, of course, you have to give them, you have to motivate them, inform them, educate them, so that they take a broader view of what the problem is.
Can I just jump in there? It's something that it always sticks in my head that you mentioned before, Walter. I suppose it touches on what you mentioned at the start there, mentioning stocks. You mentioned before that the natural nature doesn't produce waste. So I suppose it regulates itself. It maintains the value and utilizes its own stock, and humans, I suppose, are trying to replicate that. Do you think there's an appetite for that? You know, like there's a lot of noise, obviously, around sustainability and circular economy and climate change. But do you think that the people who are really touching on the policymakers, do you think there's a real appetite for that now? We're now beginning to reach some of those tipping points. You know, how far do we need to tip over before something really happens?
Well, when people refer to nature, they normally forget that nature has no objective, no planning, time schedule, no monetary limits. Nature is an absolute chaotic system, self-regulated system. And therefore, we cannot copy nature into our industry. We can possibly copy it in our society. That people, the behavioral things Eileen talked about, reduce, renounce, has nothing got to do with economics. It's personal behavior. But unfortunately, the politicians are as lost as any manager with regard to sustainability. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals that we should reach by 2030, only one of the 17 so far is on course. And we'll have the COP meeting soon in Dubai. I think it will be a complete waste of time again, like the last one, because politicians talk about things, you can give them the measures, but they don't take action. And we only change things if people also in the studio are prepared to take action.
Can I ask, Walter, we're running short of time now, I have to close off. So I'd like each of you to say one thing. And that question is going to be the same to both of you. And it's, how can you as an individual influence the future? Nicki, in your role, how can you influence things?
I feel speaking the same language and on the ground with people, I think putting more, and kind of, I suppose, thinking what Walter has just said there, putting things into action where possible. You know, like there's a lot of noise about sustainability and climate change and everything else, but I think putting things into action, I suppose, putting, you know, actually,
so they're doing more than
walking the walk, you know, instead of just talking the talk, I suppose.
Walter, how about you? What one thing do you think you can do to influence the landscape?
The advice I give to all people is take care, enjoy using your talents and your belongings, and take good care of them.
That's extremely good advice. So it's all about resource management, really, isn't it? Then
yes,
from the sounds of it, yeah.
And yourself, that your talents and your objects are the thing you can control and promote.
Well, that's a wonderful way to finish our fireside chat. Very homely and very informative and inspiring. Jonathan, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. I think everybody should be able to hear me at the moment. It's the first time I switched on my mic, so just checking to be sure. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you already for this very, very interesting information we've been giving. It's difficult sometimes to maintain an overview of what's going on in terms of sustainability, so it's very nice to hear from all of you. I have the very, very pleasurable job to introduce Tim Wagendorp. I'm not going to take up too much of your time myself, but Tim is a very, very much more interesting speaker than me when it comes to sustainability. So, Tim, I would start by giving you the opportunity to just introduce yourself very briefly, what you do, who you are, what projects you're working on at the moment, and what we can expect in the future, of course.
So, thanks, Jonathan. My name is Tim. I work in Flanders, Belgium, as a sustainability coordinator for the Flanders Audiovisueel Fund. So I'm somehow like Nicki, but where Nicki's working for a broadcaster, I'm working for a funding institution. And in 2013, my colleagues decided that all projects that receive my cash, our taxpayers' funding for productions, they are asked to work on sustainability and to make sustainable choices. And it's my job to translate that challenge into practice. And when we started, the focus was a lot on can we reduce carbon on a set. But some of the discussions we have been having the past years is, where does this start and stop? Shouldn't you be taught at school about this topic? How does sustainability as a broad focus, SDGs, fits into storytelling? And not only in the narrative, but also in the eco-conception of stories. Because if I write, we have to travel to South Africa to have the perfect shot, I will have to know that it has a complexity in the production. So that's another level, but also on the funding and how expensive is sustainability, and where can you make money, where can you spend more money. And then in the end of the value chain, we also look at what's the role of distribution, streaming, broadcasters, cinemas, festivals. There we not only think about environmental impact, but also about social importance. Like maybe I can have a wonderful debate about whatever sustainable topic after viewing a film and have a role as an ambassador in society. And I'm really pleasured or honored to be able to somehow link science with behavior science, with sustainability, filmmaking, and that I think it's my daily job, and I what I feel is that it's about as Nicki said, awareness and about about your impact as a professional, and we try to work on all the different elements. And one of the projects I've been actively involved with was Eureka, the carbon calculator developed within the Green Screen project that I will probably talk about later on. But also as a fund, what I see as a public fund, we are in different networks all over Europe, and we all want the same, but we all want it differently. And being a filmmaker, co-producing in different countries, having to follow 5 or 10 different sustainable criteria and approaches makes it impossible. And I think there's an enormous need at European level to exchange these best practices, to inform each other, to inspire each other, and to also look at how can suppliers, for instance, push our industry and play a vital role in this green challenge.
Yeah, that's very clear. You already shortly mentioned Eureka. Can you just give us an overview of what is it, what was it, what can we use it for, or what can we use it for in the future? What way is it going?
Okay. Before Eureka, we as a fund, we asked productions to report in an Excel calculator, and it looked like a tax declaration. It gave people a headache, including me, because it was too much focusing on details, and were Flemish numbers and a lot of macros that could break down. So people saw it as a punishment. And within Green Screen, a European-funded project on sustainable film strategies, we were given the opportunity to develop a European calculator as a pilot phase. And the idea was, can we create something which is idiot-proof, simple to use, user-friendly? That was one thing, with a focus on audiovisual production that covers the different departments which are important, as Nicki already mentioned, and Eileen in the previous talk. So it's relevant for people in the industry, and that uses European averages for most of the choices we make. And we partnered up with the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium, who are experts in life cycle assessment. And they taught us that for almost everything you have a European average, because a car is a car. If I drive my car in Belgium or in Spain, it's the same diesel in the same engine. So the outcome is the same. And only for electricity, there's the need of having regional impact. So that scientific base taught us a lot about how detailed do we have to measure. And it also taught us a lot about the scope. Do we include the making of a car, the mining of the elements of making a car, distribution, and end of life, the circular aspect of our consumption, or is it just the fuel I put in my engine? And so Eureka somehow brings this together. And for me, looking at the tool, it's not a magical stick. It doesn't make any wonders. It's just a compass. It can teach us about my production is that amount of carbon or that amount of other types of environmental impact, because it also talks about sulfur and radiation and acidity, and because carbon is important, but maybe, as Walter mentioned, there are also other problems in this planet. So it gives a total to a project. It also shows the relative importance of different departments. Is the challenged mobility, as Nicki said, or energy or transport or waste and materials or something else? And there again, every project is different, so it can be a compass looking at where is my real challenge. And it can also be, let's call it a motivational tool. It can show people I'm a craftsman in whatever department. I have to create the set. What is the impact of my job in this production, and how can my craftsmanship and my creativity be part of the solution? So, and I think it's also really linked to that craftsmanship. It's not about having one Chinese volunteer reporting every detail of a production. It's also about, can this be a team aspect? And that's also embedded in Eureka. So everybody can be part of the calculation if they want, and somehow feed their daily choices into the calculation. And it's like it's a tool for a team. It's not one Chinese volunteer.
Yeah. You mentioned it was idiot-proof, which always sounds like music to my ears. But I suppose in the framework of Eureka, you've been working with a lot of media companies. A lot of companies have been using it. Are there some major remarks or some major some major pieces of feedback you've gotten from them?
What we For my fund, we oblige productions to use the calculator as a tool, as a compass. We don't control the numbers themselves. So I don't care if your project is 70 or 80 or 800, because that's linked to the story you create and the project you produce. But we push them to use the tool. And for us, we always try to make it as relevant as possible. So it is about, can these numbers help you to decide between veggie food or non-veggie food, or between driving or flying? So we try to make them, to make Eureka something that can really help you to make calculated decisions. One, and secondly, we also, within the tool, we also have embedded a qualitative layer. It's not only about numbers, it's also about, I give an example in the field of accommodation. If you sleep overnight near the set, you reduce traveling. Did you think about this? Yes, no. If yes, write your comments. Or if you book a hotel, do you book a hotel with an eco label, or maybe their own internal sustainable action plan instead of whatever hotel? So it's also a compass in, did you think about sustainable choices, which are not always quantifiable? I hope it's the right word. So sometimes it's much more about having a direction towards a greener choice, and knowing the exact number is not always the purpose. So, and in some cases, as it is in all industries and all individuals, some people, they say, finally, a tool that I can use for my job, and other things, it's a bunch of bullshit. And so we have, the reactions are in between, but we try to show them that it can be a tool to better understand their impact, and much more efficient than my old Excel.
You mentioned, of course, you're linked to a fund, and I suppose this means that there can be a certain regulatory aspect to the use of the calculator. You have a certain, well, let's say not a reason for them to use the calculator, but a certain incentive in terms of them receiving funding. Do you see this as being a very important aspect? Do you see the sector as being reluctant to follow in terms of sustainability, or do you think there's really a mindset going on at the moment?
I think there's still a lot to do, and the sector is very different. Sometimes you have a big production company that are far ahead. Sometimes you have small crews that are far ahead, but you also see people that never considered their own impact as a professional in the film industry. So, but us as a fund, for us, the calculator helps us to understand how big our problem is, and how it translates into these different departments. And I know that some funds use a calculator as a certification tool, and they want to know every detail of every choice and have an invoice and maybe have a formal audit to check every number of a calculator, because that way they are sure that the public funding they give is approved or is controlled. But if a filmmaker can make me believe that Superman can fly, they can also make me believe that they were sustainable and that carbon calculator was filled in. So, but for in my fund, the obligation is into creating an action plan, trying to follow that action plan and to reflect on that action plan, and the calculator is just an element of that plan. So it's much more about the way towards becoming more green than about a hard number or a fetish for an Excel or a percentage. So it's much more about it's part of our toolbox, and we as a fund, we have the power, or we have, if we want, we can ask for details in the financial controls we do. So if I see a production, like you mentioned, if Nicki says I use the fancy hydrogen generator, I could ask my colleagues about can you check the invoice of that generator, because it's interesting for me and I want to know more about it. So, but it's much, I don't want to control every choice or every meal which was veggie or not, because it would be a waste of time. I think we should invest the time we have and the resources we have in investing in being sustainable instead of proving that I was sustainable or not.
Yeah, I completely agree with the last part. Another question, we've heard some of the major aspects, for example, traveling, energy production. I think with the major technological innovations and especially the speed of innovations going on at the moment, it's quite a challenge. For example, if you see that virtual production is being highlighted as a possibility to reduce traveling, to reduce those aspects, but then energy consumption can go up. Is it even possible with all the technological innovation going on at the moment to stay up to date? And do you see any big blind spots at the moment where you say we really need a lot of research still?
That's the €1 million question, Jonathan. Thanks for that. It's very easy to calculate the difference between a veggie meal and a non-veggie meal. But as you say, some of the processes and the technology we use in virtual production, in gaming, in animation, in post-production, they are so complex that we need engineers to understand them. And what I see within, and the same is within Eureka, we are already happy that we can just put a number on one day of post-production in whatever studio. But many of the calculators, they cannot say, is animation technology A better than animation technology B or C? And I think that there we really need more scientific input with LCE experts and, as Nicki said, professionals from our industry and bridge that gap between scientific knowledge and technology innovation to really understand the challenges. And one of the examples you mentioned, virtual production. We had a study within Green Screen on virtual production. And there some of the issues that were raised was it can be a tool to be more efficient in filmmaking. It should not be the sport to use it for whatever possible. But we should also be aware of what the impact of the screens and the making of these screens, what's the impact of LED lamps on the health of people under these screens. What about the impact of the images made that are reflected on the screens? Because if we all start traveling as chicken all around the world to film the same Eiffel Tower, then we have a problem. So maybe we should think about like something like a common collection of images that can be used within virtual production, so we can avoid that we all travel around to shoot the same images that we use in our virtual studios, etc., etc. So I think that it needs better understanding and more scientific input. And yeah, we are in collaboration also again with University of Leuven to look at can we fund scientific studies to better understand the topics. And at this moment we're partnered in a study in Vlaanderen on sustainability within game development. But the same discussion go for instance animation. And there again, maybe it's good to mention the work done by Ecoprot in France. They just launched a guide on sustainable animation. Again, linking science with animation specialists.
A question I don't think that has been asked today yet is that there have been a lot of changes in the media landscape when it comes to sustainability, such as, for example, the European tender for a carbon calculator. Could you just give us your opinion on how the landscape is looking at the moment, the direction it's going, and some of the major changes we can expect in the near future?
What I see, I started my job 7 years ago in the fund at VAF. And the last years, I see many institutions putting this topic on the agenda. And looking alone at Belgium, I work for the Cultural Flemish Fund. There's a Commercial Flemish Fund. There's a Brussels Fund. There's a Wallonian Commercial Fund and a Wallonia Cultural Fund. So that's already 5 funds in our small Belgian country. And we all have a different approach. We all want the same, but we all do it in a different way. And I hope that Europe at one point can help us to define a common scope. But today I'm afraid, and it's my personal opinion, that scope is too much. Let's measure CO2 and then everybody's happy. And it's not enough on can we create synergies? Can we exchange best practices? Can we learn from each other? Can we gap the bridge between science and our industry? So I need that there's still an enormous European opportunity to really work together and co-create instead of having yet another platform with basic tools or yet another guideline on green production, or because we all try to write the same guidelines and the same inspirational guides and the same whatever, but we should also look at what are the gaps in the landscape. And almost nobody's talking about storytelling and sustainability or about motivation and psychology. And I think that one of an important element is, and there I agree with Walter, it's much broader than just CO2. Because what about, imagine that I'm producing a film, and if I can tell at the end, my production was carbon neutral, but my boss was a sexist. Or we destroyed the desert where I was shooting with my diesel truck. Or so I think it's broader than just carbon. And at European level, the main focus is carbon at this moment. But then again, when you look at the Green Deal at European level, there they mention DNSH as a principle, which is again looking at carbon and climate change, but also at climate adaptation and also at consumption. So you see different compasses, different focus on sustainability at European level. And then I didn't even mention the SDGs and more social ways of impact. And what I also see is, it might sound philosophical, but we should also think about the mental health of people, because we can all write great guidelines and guidance. And as Nicki said, we need the people on the sets to be part of this challenge. And if you're under stress and you try to survive day in, day out, and you have a tight schedule and an even tighter budget, then being sustainable is the last thing you have to do. And I can tell people about this fancy generator or this fantastic paint from France, but we don't have the mental availability to look for that and to experiment with that paint or with that generator or with that whatever it is. We need to finish the job for tomorrow. So I think that we should also look at what do craft people on set need to be able to invest and to understand the challenges and to embed innovation in their work.
That's a very, very nice way to wrap up your presentation. It's been extremely insightful, so thank you very much for that.